make me do this. You were designed to protect humans from mutants.
That is not logical. Mutants are human. Therefore, humans must be protected from themselves.
I'm G.A. Soto. Hello. The concept of race is a very tedious one to go over, simply because of how insignificant and irrelevant it is regarding much of our lives as human beings. As the world becomes more globalized, most people understand that although there are superficial phenotypic differences between people as a result of their evolution, we now understand from our interactions that this is not of concern, unlike practical factors of a person, such as behavior, skill, intelligence, culture, attitude, level of empathy and sociability, and so on. However, despite this general understanding among people, false notions, fear, distrust, resentment, hatred, and strange beliefs persist among people all over the world, regarding people they consider to be part of what we call different races. And so to begin this series that will analyze different factors that explain the condition in which Black or African populations find themselves in our time, it is important to understand what a race is, how the idea came about, and how much significance it bears on human beings. First and foremost, we must understand what makes a human being human. Now, unless one bases their understanding of the existence of humans from a source other than established scientific biology, so spiritual or science fiction or religious or some combination of the sorts, then the classification of human puts us in the same kingdom as other animals such as insects, fish, and crabs, the same class of mammals such as bears, cows, pigs, and even whales, the same order of primates such as lemurs and bush babies, the same family of Hominidae, which is other great apes like gorillas, the same subfamily of Hominini, such as chimpanzees, the same genus of Homo, such as Neanderthals and humans under Homo erectus, which are now extinct. And finally, the unique species of sapiens, which you watching this and I are a part of, unless we're being watched by aliens or highly intelligent chimps or something. We know our own classification of species because we are able to trace our ancestry back to one common ancestor. So in short, human beings are the most common, widespread, and industrious primates on planet Earth. The industrious part has only been that way for a few thousand years, which in the grand scheme of things is not that long considering how long the Earth has been around. Humans can grow to different shapes, sizes, colors, and other features, but regardless of which part of the world of which we evolved, our biology is the same, in that we all bear a nervous, cardiovascular, digestive, endocrinal, reproductive, urinary, etc. system. Regardless of geographical location or appearances, all humans living in groups have in time created complex societies and civilizations with effective methods to survive and thrive, especially dictated by the needs to adapt to their environment. Temperate places require certain needs, while tropical places require different needs. The more humans learn from each other through the exchange of information, items, and services, the more exceptionally and quickly the civilization advances and thrives. The more civilizations remain apart from larger groups, the slower they advance and the less they progress, and are thus in a more susceptible position to be conquered by other groups of humans. Because as many of you know, one thing that has been around for almost as long as humans have is conflict and competition, but we'll get to that in a moment. The oldest trace of humans is found in Africa, but humans have spread across continents, resulting in different appearances, languages, cultures, relations with other humans, and innovations over time. And by the time humans began understanding that the land they know of extends beyond what they were under the impression to be the entire world, their migrations, explorations, and travels resulted in different groups of humans meeting each other again, and the apparent differences in appearance, language, and so on were noticeable. But so was the understanding that they were indeed human, despite their differences. Humans at the time obviously did not possess the knowledge of biology, history, and genetics that we have today. And so some sought an explanation for how people could look, specifically look, so different from each other. And this now begins our story of race. Now many may think that the further back you go, the more racist the world was, when in fact that's not really the case. Now yes, although physical appearances have practically always led people to draw conclusions on a group of people's status as equal, inferior, or superior, people had other reasons to hate each other back then. Most people in different societies tended to resemble each other, but it seems that even when people of a different skin, eye, or hair color would appear, people were generally more concerned about whether that person adopted the social norms of the greater society and assimilated into the culture. The general idea among Greeks and Romans was that environment and climate caused different physical appearances among people, because it was clear that those who appeared different from their norm were were still very much human. But it is very important to note that different civilizations still considered civilizations other than their own to be barbarian and uncivilized, regardless of what they looked like. Hippocrates, sometimes known as the father of modern medicine, was quite ahead of his time by stating that physical differences among people were results of their environment and climate. He believed that these factors also influence people's general behaviors or temperaments, with some natural environments making people gentler or industrious or warlike and so on. Things, however, began to go backwards in Europe regarding the idea of race, and although it is not mentioned as often, it is largely due to religion, specifically Christianity and Islam. The Talmud, the central book in Rabbinic Judaism, state that the children of Ham, one of Noah's sons, yes, that Noah, were cursed with black skin due to Ham having laughed at Noah, his father, when Noah got drunk and stripped himself naked in front of everybody, which I guess were not a lot of people at the time. This idea of a curse on people with a certain skin color gave both Christians and Muslims justification for slavery against Africans, just as much as the idea of a superior Aryan race and a parasitic Jewish race gave justification for the Holocaust centuries later. But there was a number of Muslim thinkers who completely rejected the idea of the black race being inferior. One thinker in particular pointed to the nation of Ghana that he considered to be a great one. Though things continued to go downhill as the centuries progressed, the scientific world began to expand, and because of much of Europe having grown up and normalized the idea of black people being inferior from a spiritual and just common sense perspective, these ideas reflected in the sciences developed by generations that came about from the 17th century onwards. It began with the biological and geological sciences simply trying to classify different things such as plants and rocks and animals. Now, in order to classify humans, the great question was raised: monogenism or polygenism? Did humans evolve from a single source or from different origins? Now, both positions may have one time or another contained notions of creation, particularly from a Christian background, in the sense that we either all came from the same parents, Adam and Eve, or that God created different types or races of species of people and set them in different parts of the world. Everyone just kept going deeper into it since then, possibly beginning with the French physician François Bernier and his journal article Nouvelle division de la Terre par des différentes espèces ou races l'habitant, in which he listed 4 different races that inhabit the earth. Then the German physician Johann Friedrich Blumenbach divided races into 5 races to which many people still refer today, namely Caucasian, Mongolian, Malayan, Ethiopian, and American. No, I mean the other Americans. Yeah. It is important to note that Blumenbach found some pretty interesting discoveries during his studies, such as that Africans differ between each other much more than they differ between Europeans when studying their anatomy. He also noted that they are in no way inferior regarding mental capacities or intelligence, and that the physical characteristics such as hair characteristics, facial features, cranial profiles, and skin color are a result of geography, nutrition, and custom. This is interesting because this is what other thinkers had been correctly believing for centuries before. Things then began heading south again real fast as we enter probably the most racist age in documented world history, the age of scientific racism. Notions of 3 races, then 7 races, or 11 races, and 12 races were being thrown around and suggested by different people. What's important to note here is that many times the biggest names in the field would often place different races into hierarchies, and of course with the Caucasian race always being on top. Other writers at the time were developing ideas about a master race, and different migrations in Europe were taking place, and so people were moving about simply to make a better life for themselves in different nations. This of course meant that many people saw new faces in their country for the first time, and not being particularly happy about it, especially with the backwards ideas of race that by then, in Europe, were considered factual. Eugenics was also quite popular at the time, and it was common for people to believe that the world would be a better place if some people simply did not exist, based on certain features about them, of course. It was at this time that writers such as Jean-Louis Agassiz and others who wrote extensively on ideas that we today consider racialism, claiming that different races are endowed with unique attributes and capacities, and some races are just better than others. This was, of course, very popular with slave traders at the time, and it's important to note that Agassiz incorporated Christian religious ideas into his work by claiming that God created different races at the same time and determined where they would dwell. Worse than him is the French aristocrat Arthur de Gobineau, who was one of the key players in establishing the idea of Aryans being a master race, that the white race was superior to all other races, and that the mixture of races, whether sexual or even just by cohabitation in the same society, would lead to chaos by disrupting the natural order of things, quote unquote. Charles Darwin's extensive work was able to prove these ideas wrong and put an end to the monogenism-polygenism debate. The scientific evidence that proved that all humans evolved from one common ancestor, and that the alleged intellectual or otherwise superiority of the white race above others being a myth, began swaying people away from scientific racism. But what really led societies to start changing their minds about the discrimination and cruelty against people on the basis of their race or ethnicity was largely due to the world witnessing the horrors and atrocities that can come out of racism, especially religious and scientific racism, from the events of World War II. Of course, other injustices were happening in other parts of the world. It took almost another 2 decades for the American Civil Rights Movement to come about. Different African nations began declaring independence from European colonies. Of course, South Africa was a bit late to the party, only officially ending apartheid after nearly 40 years. The history of race as a concept is a long and messy one, and what I've described is heavily simplified in the interest of time. But my point is to establish an important understanding. The idea that people have inherent capacities, traits, predispositions, or characteristics dependent on their so-called race is an erroneous, outdated notion from which we've scientifically progressed, but culturally, race is still seen as something worth considering to different groups, organizations, and individuals for their own reasons. Some parts of the world indeed have people that look a particular way, and indeed we find certain tendencies, behaviors, and habits among some populations. But we know from mountains of evidence that factors such as culture, environment, upbringing, nutrition, circumstances, economic status, quality of life, presence or absence of war or disease, and so on, are what influence a person's life as well as the lives of their children. In other words, these are things that are not determined by their race. The effects of racial oppression against people of different races over the course of a few centuries lingers in some societies that have been affected by them. But it would appear that different groups of people have a different outcome even after having been previously disadvantaged. A short example of this is that although Japan was far behind the rest of Europe in terms of technology and modernization in the first half of the 19th century, it only took a few decades for them to go from being walked on by the Americans to being a military power that required an atom bomb to stop them. Actually, 2 of them. Achieving a society that took Europe centuries to accomplish in far shorter time. Is this because Japanese people are simply more intelligent due to their race? Or is it because they firstly had the resources they needed at their disposal? Their progressive leadership at the time was in such a centralized position that changes in policy and technology that had already been invented by others were easy to integrate into the country. And what about Africa? When the Portuguese arrived in Congo and began trade for technology such as firearms with the natives, why did the kingdom fall to the point where the Belgians were able to easily seize their land? Is it because Congolese people are simply less intelligent due to their race? Or is it because the trade that their leadership conducted with the Portuguese was of African slaves, willingly sold off by a spineless king, and in many cases even unlawfully kidnapped by Portuguese traders, leading to a great depopulation of the nation, especially of adult men, and after a few uprisings and infighting, led to collapse. In this series, I am particularly interested in the condition of black people around the world. Now, of course, black people are in no way a homogeneous group, but certain statistics and problems appear, on paper at least, to be prevalent in different predominantly black groups and communities around the world. Stereotypes tend to form from people who hear quick statistics that sometimes they make up on the spot, or from long-held beliefs that have been passed down from generation to generation about black people. Oftentimes people wish to conclude on a matter by the end results they observe, with no consideration whatsoever of the factors that led to the end results. And most people are not interested enough or willing to learn the reality of a matter anyway, especially when they want a certain narrative to be true. But if you're one of those that is interested in reality, then in this series we will explore questions regarding the contemporary state of black people around the world and explanations regarding notions, stereotypes, and generalizations that people, including black people themselves, may have regarding different so-called races of humans. You may be surprised about how many generalizations you may hold regarding your own race or that of others, whether positive or negative, as we will hone in on the impact it has on people and societies in everyday life in our time. I'm G.A. Sola. Goodbye.